Sir, you need to get off this plane. Now! The words exploded from Carmen Rodriguez's mouth like bullets, not whispered, not apologetic, declared with the venom of someone who thought she held all the power in the world. Dr. Anthony Jackson looked up from his leather briefcase, his calm brown eyes meeting her furious stare. He didn't know that those 8 words would cost Meridian Airways $34 billion in less than 24 hours. Before we dive into the most expensive meltdown in aviation history, let me ask you something. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong, only to prove them devastatingly wrong? If this resonates, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will redefine justice at 30,000 feet. The fluorescent lights of JFK International Airport hummed with that familiar headache-inducing frequency that makes every late-night traveler question their life choices. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday gate C-14, the kind of hour when the terminal should have been winding down into the quiet hum of overnight cleaning crews and red-eye passengers. Instead, the gate area buzzed with the chaotic energy of a delayed flight and 248 increasingly agitated travelers. Flight 638 to London Heathrow sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its engines cold, its belly full of cargo that included diplomatic pouches and classified documents that could shift the global energy market. The aircraft itself was worth $127 million. The cargo inside priceless. The man they were about to drag off it. He owned their entire world. Carmen Rodriguez stood behind the gate counter like a fortress commander surveying a battlefield. 34 years old, with shoulder-length black hair pulled into a severe ponytail and a Meridian Airways blazer that fit like armor, she had been with the airline for 8 grinding years. 8 years of dealing with entitled passengers, missed promotions, and the kind of workplace stress that turns customer service into personal warfare. Behind her, the departure board flickered Flight 638. Delayed. New departure time TBD. The delay wasn't mechanical. It wasn't weather. It was mathematics. They had sold 252 seats on an aircraft that held 248 passengers. Someone had to go. Carmen's eyes swept the waiting area with the calculated precision of a predator selecting prey. Business travelers hunched over laptops, families with crying children sprawled across uncomfortable chairs, and scattered throughout the chaos first-class passengers who paid premium prices for the illusion that money could shield them from airline incompetence. Her gaze landed on Dr. Anthony Jackson. He sat in seat 1A of the boarding area, a man who commanded attention without demanding it. 6 feet 2 inches of quiet dignity wrapped in a custom-tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Carmen made in a month. His graying temples caught the harsh fluorescent light hinting at his 48 years, and his hands moved with the practiced precision of someone accustomed to handling documents that governments would kill for. The leather briefcase beside him wasn't just luggage. It contained energy policy frameworks that would be presented at the G7 Energy Security Summit in 14 hours, documents that could redirect $500 billion in global renewable energy investment, papers that required security clearance just to touch. But Carmen saw none of that. She saw a black man in an expensive suit, and in her world, that combination meant trouble. Dr. Jackson checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that had been a gift from the Secretary of Energy after the successful negotiation of the North American Energy Alliance. The weight of it on his wrist reminded him of responsibility of the thousands of people whose jobs depended on the deals he brokered, the millions whose energy costs could be reduced by the policies he crafted. He had no assistant traveling with him tonight, no entourage, no visible signs of the power he wielded. Just a man who happened to be one of the most influential energy policy architects in the world, traveling alone. Because sometimes the most important conversations happen in quiet corners away from cameras and recording devices. The intercom crackled to life with a sound like breaking glass. Carmen's voice filled the gate area, sharp and nasal, dripping with the kind of irritation that comes from 8 years of dealing with people she considered beneath her patience. Attention passengers of Flight 638 to London Heathrow. We are currently in an oversold situation. We need 4 volunteers to give up their seats for a voucher of $800. Please approach the podium immediately. Silence. Not the thoughtful silence of consideration, but the hostile silence of passengers who had paid full fare and had no intention of volunteering for anything. Dr. Jackson didn't look up. He was reviewing the final draft of the Energy Security Accord, a document he had spent 6 months crafting. The summit began at 8 a.m. London time. If he missed this flight, he missed the signing. If he missed the signing, the deal died. If the deal died, energy prices across 3 continents would remain unstable for another decade. But more than that, this was personal. At 26, he had been denied boarding on a similar flight. Same excuse? Same lies. Same system designed to remove people like him when convenience demanded it. He had spent 22 years ensuring that would never happen again. Carmen waited exactly 30 seconds, her acrylic nails clicking against the podium like gunfire. No volunteers. No surprise. She had already decided who was leaving this aircraft. Dr. Jackson approached the boarding lane for Group 1 first-class passengers with priority boarding. His boarding pass glowed on his phone screen, Seat 1A, purchased 3 weeks ago at full price $15,000 that could have paid for a year of college for most families. Carmen didn't look up. She was furiously typing on her keyboard, each keystroke a small act of violence against the system that had passed her over for promotion, again and again. When she finally acknowledged his presence, her eyes moved over him like a scanner searching for contraband. Boarding pass, she snapped, still not making eye contact. Dr. Jackson held out his phone. The QR code glowed brightly against the dark screen. Good evening. Anthony Jackson, Seat 1A. Carmen finally looked up. Her eyes performed the same calculation they had done 1,000 times before. Black man, expensive clothes, first-class ticket. The math didn't add up in her worldview. Hold on, she said, her voice flat as roadkill. She typed something into her terminal, frowned at the screen, and then reached for the printer. A piece of paper emerged with the mechanical precision of a bureaucratic guillotine. There's a problem with your ticket. Dr. Jackson's voice remained steady, the tone of a man accustomed to dealing with hostile foreign ministers and corrupt energy executives. What kind of problem? I checked in online yesterday. I have my confirmation right here. Carmen waved the printout like evidence in a criminal trial. System says we need the seat. Crew transport. We have a deadheading pilot and 3 flight attendants who need to get to London for their shift tomorrow. Federal regulations say they take priority over passengers. The lie sat between them like a landmine. There were no federal regulations requiring passengers to give up paid seats for crew convenience. There were policies that airlines hid behind procedures designed to transfer the cost of their incompetence to paying customers. Dr. Jackson felt the familiar prickle of recognition. This moment, this tone, this system designed to erase people like him when money and power needed to clean house. Miss Rodriguez, he said, reading her name tag with the kind of attention that made people nervous. I understand operational logistics, but surely you're not bumping a full-fare first-class passenger. I have a summit in London at 8 a.m. I cannot miss this flight. Carmen let out a sigh so dramatic it could have won awards. She rolled her eyes for the benefit of her colleague Jessica, a younger woman with blonde hair and terrified eyes, who was watching this confrontation develop like a car accident in slow motion. Sir, don't make this difficult. It's not my choice. The computer algorithm selects passengers based on ticket class and check-in time. You were selected. Another lie. The algorithm was Carmen's finger pointing at the passenger she wanted gone. We can get you on the 8 p.m. flight tomorrow. That is too late, Doctor. Late, Jackson said, stepping closer to the podium but keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. 22 years in international energy policy had taught him that being a black man raising his voice in public could escalate from conversation to crisis in seconds. I am the keynote speaker and primary signatory for the International Aviation Safety Accord. I paid full fare for this seat. I am boarding this plane." Carmen stood up. 5 feet 4 inches of weaponized bureaucracy wielding her minimal authority like a club. "Sir, step aside. You're blocking the boarding lane. If you don't step aside immediately, I will classify this as a disturbance and call security." Dr. Jackson's jaw tightened. Around them, other passengers had stopped pretending to ignore the confrontation. Phones were emerging from pockets. Cameras were focusing. The modern coliseum of social media was preparing for blood. "It's not a disturbance to ask for the service I paid for, doctor." Jackson set his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar energy deals in rooms where voices never rose above conversational volume. Carmen reached for her radio with the eager motion of someone who had been waiting for this moment all day. "Jason," she called to her colleague, "call the captain and get Port Authority on standby." The announcement echoed through Gate C-14 like a declaration of war. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay of Flight 638. Due to an oversold situation, we are offering volunteers a compensation package of $1,200 to take tomorrow evening's departure. Still no volunteers." Carmen's eyes swept the gate area again, but they kept returning to the same target. Dr. Anthony Jackson sat calmly in his seat, reviewing documents that could reshape global energy policy, unaware that he had become the designated sacrifice for Meridian Airways' corporate incompetence. In seat 14C, Rachel Martinez adjusted her phone's camera angle. A travel blogger with 500,000 TikTok followers, she had been documenting her journey to London for a sustainable tourism conference. The tension at the gate was too good to ignore. "Okay, guys," she whispered to her phone camera. "Something's happening at JFK right now. Meridian Airways oversold their flight and they're targeting this one passenger who clearly paid for first class. This feels wrong." 3 rows behind her, David Kim looked up from his laptop. A business consultant returning from a client meeting, he had seen enough corporate meltdowns to recognize the early stages of a public relations disaster. His Twitter account, followed by 45,000 professionals, had live-tweeted everything from boardroom coups to product launches gone wrong. He opened the Twitter app and began typing real-time discrimination happening at Meridian Airgate C-14. They're targeting a black passenger to give up his paid seat. This is 2023, not 1963. Hashtag Flightgate 638. Meanwhile, on the aircraft, Captain Blake Morrison was conducting his pre-flight inspection with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the sky. 52 years old, with silver hair and a tan that cost more than most people's cars, he was Meridian Airways royalty. His father had been one of the airline's founding pilots back in 1967, and Blake had grown up believing that the Morrison name carried weight in aviation circles. It did. Just not the kind of weight he thought. Blake's personnel file, locked in corporate HR systems, contained a pattern of complaints: passenger mistreatment, bias incidents, verbal altercations with crew members who questioned his authority. Each complaint had been quietly settled, buried under the kind of corporate protections that money could buy. Jessica Walsh stood in the aircraft's galley checking passenger manifests on her tablet. 28 years old with 3 years of flight attendant experience, she had joined Meridian because she believed in customer service. That belief had been tested repeatedly by management policies that seemed designed to create conflict rather than resolve it. Her tablet showed the passenger list for tonight's flight: 248 souls, including diplomats, business executives, families heading to vacation, and one Dr. Anthony Jackson in Seat 1A. His frequent flyer status showed Platinum Plus, indicating millions of miles flown with Meridian Airways. His purchase history showed consistent first-class bookings, always paid at full fare, never a problem passenger. Jessica's training had taught her to look for red flags. Dr. Jackson had none. The radio on her belt crackled to life. Carmen's voice sharp with authority. Flight 638. We have a passenger refusing to voluntarily deplane. Prepare for potential security boarding. Jessica keyed her radio. Gate, this is Walsh. What's the passenger's seat number 1A? Dr. Anthony Jackson. Jessica scrolled through her passenger notes. Premium frequent flyer, clean record, full fare ticket purchased weeks in advance. She looked at Captain Morrison, who was emerging from the cockpit with the expression of a man eager for confrontation. Captain passenger in 1A is Platinum Plus status. Full fare early booking. No red flags in the system. Morrison's laugh was dry as desert wind. Walsh. I don't care if he's the damn Pope. If Rodriguez says he's off the plane, he's off the plane. This is my aircraft, and I decide who flies. Back at the gate, the situation was escalating with mathematical precision. Officer Daniel Murphy had arrived from airport security, a 35-year-old former military police officer who specialized in de-escalation. His job was to calm situations before they required force. Unfortunately, his job was about to become impossible. Dr. Jackson had not moved from his seat in the boarding area. He continued reviewing his summit documents, occasionally checking his watch. To the casual observer, he appeared calm, almost detached from the chaos swirling around him. In reality, he was making mental calculations. The G7 Energy Summit represented 18 months of negotiation. The renewable energy framework he had drafted could redirect $500 billion in global investment towards sustainable infrastructure. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 9 a.m. London time, with implementation beginning immediately. But more importantly, this moment represented something deeper. At 26, fresh out of graduate school, he had been removed from a flight in Chicago. Same excuse, same lies, same system that viewed people like him as disposable when convenience demanded sacrifice. That night in 1999, sleeping on an airport bench because no hotel rooms were available at short notice, he had made a promise. Never again. Whatever it took. However long it took. Never again. Carmen approached Dr. Jackson with Officer Murphy flanking her like a military escort. Behind them, Luis Vargas, the gate supervisor, watched nervously. A 45-year-old Hispanic man with 15 years of airline experience, Luis had seen enough discrimination incidents to recognize one developing. Dr. Jackson Carmen said, her voice carrying the false sweetness of artificial sugar. This is Officer Murphy from Airport Security. We need to resolve this situation quickly. The other 247 passengers are waiting. Dr. Jackson looked up from his documents. His eyes moved from Carmen to Officer Murphy to Luis Vargas, reading the dynamics of power and fear written across their faces. Ms. Rodriguez, I've reviewed Meridian Airways' contract of carriage. Nothing in that document gives you the authority to remove a passenger who has not violated federal regulations, airline policies, or common decency. I have done none of those things. Carmen's face flushed red. Sir, you are defying crew instructions. That is a federal offense. No, Dr. Jackson replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of courtrooms and boardrooms. I am asking for the service I purchased. There is no federal law requiring passengers to subsidize your operational incompetence. The words hit Carmen like physical blows. Around them, the gate area had gone quiet. Passengers were no longer pretending to ignore the confrontation. Phones were recording. Social media was lighting up. Rachel Martinez had switched from TikTok to Instagram live broadcasting to 847,000 followers who were watching the drama unfold in real time. Comments flooded her screen. This is straight-up discrimination. Why are they targeting him? Someone needs to call the news. This is going viral. David Kim's Twitter thread was gaining traction. Thread real-time discrimination at JFK, Gate C14. Meridian Air targeting black passenger, Dr. Anthony Jackson for involuntary removal despite valid first-class ticket. 1 of 17 passenger has done nothing wrong, no disturbance, no policy violations. Only difference, his skin color. This is America in 2023. 2 of 17 Officer Murphy had spent enough time in law enforcement to recognize when a situation was about to spiral beyond control. Dr. Jackson showed no signs of aggression, no indication of threat. His body language was calm, professional controlled. Sir Murphy said quietly, "Is there any way we can work this out? Maybe accept the voucher, take tomorrow's flight." Dr. Jackson's response carried weight that none of them understood yet. "Officer Murphy, I'm going to give you some free advice. Walk away from this situation. Right now, before it becomes irreversible." Carmen laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Are you threatening a federal officer I'm offering professional courtesy?" Dr. Jackson replied. "Something that seems to be in short supply at Meridian Airways." Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "What's the delay? Get him off my aircraft." Carmen keyed her radio. "Captain, passenger is being non-compliant. Requesting permission to board for removal. Permission granted. Clear that seat. I want wheels up in 20 minutes. Dr. Jackson heard every word. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and found the name he needed, Maria Gonzalez. The text he sent was simple: "Activate Phoenix Protocol." 3 seconds later, his phone vibrated with a response: "Understood, sir. Initiating now." Carmen saw the phone exchange. Sir put away the phone. No communication devices during security interactions. Dr. Jackson looked at her with something approaching pity. "Ms. Rodriguez, you have just committed the most expensive mistake in aviation history. In approximately 10 minutes, you're going to wish you had listened to me." He stood up slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the boarding gate. Not retreating, not complying, walking toward the confrontation that would reshape everything. "Where do you think you're going?" Carmen called after him. Dr. Jackson turned back, his voice carrying across the gate area like a benediction. "To take my seat." The jet bridge stretched ahead like a tunnel toward destiny. Dr. Anthony Jackson walked down its length with measured steps, his leather briefcase in one hand, his phone in the other. Behind him, Carmen Rodriguez's heels clicked against the metal flooring like countdown timers, each step bringing them closer to the most expensive confrontation in corporate history. Officer Murphy followed reluctantly. 15 years of law enforcement had taught him to recognize when situations were sliding beyond control, and every instinct screamed that this was about to become a public relations nuclear bomb. But Carmen had administrative authority, and airport politics required him to follow her lead, even when that lead was driving straight off a cliff. Jessica Walsh stood at the aircraft door watching the procession approach with growing dread. Her tablet showed the passenger manifest again. Dr. Anthony Jackson, Seat 1A, Platinum Plus status, no violations, no red flags. She had dealt with difficult passengers before: drunk executives, entitled celebrities, families with screaming children. This wasn't that. This was something else entirely. Dr. Jackson stepped onto the aircraft and turned left into first class. The cabin was a study in luxury designed to make wealthy passengers forget they were trapped in a metal tube 6 miles above the earth. Leather seats that cost more than most cars. Personal entertainment systems. Climate control that responded to individual preferences. Seat 1A waited like a throne. Dr. Jackson approached it calmly, placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment, and sat down. He fastened his seatbelt with the deliberate precision of a man who had no intention of moving until the plane landed in London. Captain Blake Morrison emerged from the cockpit like a storm front. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his uniform pressed to military standards, his authority worn like armor. 25 years of flying had taught him that passengers responded to displays of power, and he had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with the right combination of intimidation and policy citations. "Problem?" Morrison asked, looking at Dr. Jackson with the expression of a man examining something unpleasant on the bottom of his shoe. "Your gate agent is attempting to remove a paying passenger without cause," Dr. Jackson replied, his voice carrying the measured tone of boardrooms and diplomatic conferences. "I am Dr. Jackson. I have a valid first-class ticket. I have critical business in London." Morrison's laugh was designed to humiliate. "Dr. Jackson. What kind of doctor?" "Chiropractor." "Look, buddy, the seat belongs to the airline. We just rent it to you. And right now I need that seat for my relief officer. So grab your bag, take the voucher, and we'll get you on tomorrow's flight." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Around them, economy passengers were boarding, moving past the confrontation in first class with the careful attention of people trying not to stare at a car accident. "I am not a chiropractor," Dr. Jackson said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming ice over steel. "And I am telling you, Captain Morrison, that removing me from this flight will be a mistake that Meridian Airways cannot afford." Morrison's face reddened. He stepped forward, invading Dr. Jackson's personal space with the kind of aggressive posturing that had gotten him 3 formal complaints in his personnel file. "Are you threatening me on my ship? I am stating a fact," Dr. Jackson replied, his calm unbroken. Morrison keyed his radio, his voice carrying throughout the aircraft. "Security to the aircraft immediately. We have a hostile passenger in the forward cabin refusing to deplane." The lie settled over the situation like toxic fog. Dr. Jackson had not raised his voice. He had made no threats. He had shown no aggression. But in Morrison's world, a black man who didn't immediately submit to authority was hostile by definition. Rachel Martinez, watching from the gate through the aircraft windows, raised her phone to capture the exchange. Her Instagram live stream had climbed to 1.2 million viewers, comments flooding in faster than she could read them. "This is insane. Call the FBI. Sue them for everything. This is why I don't fly. Someone help that man." David Kim's Twitter thread had exploded across social media, retweeted by journalists, civil rights activists, and celebrities who recognized the viral potential of discrimination caught in real time. The hashtag Flightgate638 was trending nationally, climbing toward international attention. Inside the aircraft, the tension was suffocating. Economy passengers had stopped boarding, clustering in the aisles to watch the confrontation in first class. Flight attendants Jessica Walsh and Miguel Santos stood frozen, their training manuals offering no guidance for situations where their own management was creating the crisis. Dr. Jackson pulled out his phone and sent a second text. "They're calling security. Expedite timeline." The response came immediately. "Conference call ready. Board assembled." Carmen Rodriguez marched onto the aircraft, her face flushed with the thrill of conflict. 8 years of dealing with passengers she considered beneath her had led to this moment of absolute authority. "He's still here," she announced to Morrison, her voice carrying throughout the first-class cabin. "I told him to leave." "I have a valid ticket, doctor," Jackson said, looking straight ahead, his hands folded calmly in his lap. "I am not moving until we land in London." Morrison's voice rose to a shout. "Clear the cabin. Everyone off. We are deplaning until this security threat is neutralized." Groans erupted from the back of the plane. 247 passengers suddenly faced delays because Meridian Airways had decided to turn operational incompetence into racial targeting. "Come on, man, just get off!" someone shouted from row 15. "I have to get home to my kids." He paid for his ticket. A woman in row 3 shouted back, defending Dr. Jackson. "Leave him alone." The sound of heavy boots echoed through the jet bridge. 3 officers from the airport security department appeared. Officer Rodriguez, Officer Thompson, and leading them, Officer Kowalski, a man who looked like he had spent too many hours at the gym and not enough in de-escalation training, Officer Murphy. The original security response watched the backup arrive with growing unease. Kowalski had a reputation for solving problems with force first and questions later. This situation was about to get ugly. This, the problem passenger Kowalski asked, looking at Dr. Jackson like he was evaluating a target. "Refusing to deplane," Morrison said. Claims he has a ticket, but he's been selected for removal. Federal regulations require compliance with crew instructions. Another lie. Dr. Jackson had not been given any lawful crew instructions. He had been targeted for removal because Meridian Airways needed a scapegoat for their overbooking incompetence. Dr. Jackson looked up at the three officers surrounding his seat. His voice remained calm, professional, unthreateningly quiet. Officers, before you proceed, I want you to understand something. I am not resisting. I am not threatening anyone. I am sitting in a seat I purchased with a valid ticket. You are being asked to physically remove a paying customer to solve the airline's business problem. Officer Murphy nodded slightly. Everything Dr. Jackson said was accurate. Kowalski was unimpressed. Sir, you need to comply with crew instructions. Stand up and deplane voluntarily, or we'll remove you involuntarily. I will not resist, Dr. Jackson said, his voice carrying throughout the cabin. But I want everyone to understand that what happens next is a choice being made by Meridian Airways management, not by passenger misconduct. He pulled out his phone one final time and sent a third text. Execution phase. Now. Then he put the phone away, folded his hands in his lap, and prepared for what was coming. Morrison looked at Kowalski. Remove him. Officer Rodriguez reached for Dr. Jackson's left arm. Officer Thompson took position on his right. Kowalski stood ready to provide backup force. Sir, you need to stand up now, Rodriguez said. Dr. Jackson remained seated. I am not resisting. I am simply not volunteering to be the solution to your business problem. The first touch of Officer Rodriguez's hands on his arm crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Dr. Jackson had not violated any law, regulation, or policy. He was being physically removed because an airline had sold more seats than they had available and decided he looked like the most convenient target. The cameras captured everything. Rachel Martinez's live stream, David Kim's photos, a dozen other passengers documenting the moment when customer service became assault. This is being recorded, Dr. Jackson said clearly. I am not resisting. I am being forcibly removed for refusing to subsidize corporate incompetence. The officers pulled him upward. His briefcase fell to the floor, spilling classified Energy Summit documents across the first-class aisle. His shoulder struck the armrest of row 2 as they maneuvered him toward the narrow aisle. The sound was audible throughout the cabin, a sharp crack that made passengers gasp and flight attendants wince. Stop! Jessica Walsh called out. He's injured. Keep moving him, Morrison shouted. I want him off my aircraft. Dr. Jackson's shoulder screamed with pain, but he maintained his composure. Officers, you are injuring a passenger who has committed no crime, violated no regulation, and posed no threat. This is being recorded and broadcast live. They dragged him down the aisle past rows of passengers holding up phones, capturing every moment of Meridian Airways' descent into corporate barbarism. His white shirt was torn blood, seeping from where his shoulder had scraped against the seat frame. But he didn't fight back. He didn't resist. He let them drag him, let them injure him, let them commit assault on camera while the world watched. Because Dr. Anthony Jackson understood something that Morrison and Carmen and the officers didn't. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is to let it reveal itself for what it really is. At the bottom of the jet bridge, as they finally released him, Dr. Jackson straightened his torn jacket and looked directly at Captain Morrison. Captain Morrison, you have just physically assaulted the majority shareholder of Meridian Airways. Morrison laughed. Right. And I'm the Pope. Dr. Jackson pulled out his phone, scrolled to Maria Gonzalez's contact, and hit the speaker button. Maria, it's time. The voice that answered was clear, professional, and carried the authority of corporate boardrooms. Dr. Jackson Blackstone Energy Partners Board is assembled. We have CEO Richard Hawthorne on the line. Sir, are you injured? Morrison's face began to change as the reality of the situation started to penetrate his consciousness. Doctor. Jackson looked directly at him, his voice carrying across the gate area where hundreds of passengers and dozens of airport personnel had gathered to watch the confrontation. "Captain Morrison, meet your new owner." 26-year-old Anthony Jackson stood at gate K14 clutching a boarding pass he had paid for with his own money. First-class seat 2A purchased with his first real paycheck as a junior energy analyst for the Department of Energy. The ticket cost $3,400 more than his monthly rent, but this wasn't just transportation. This was a statement. The National Energy Policy Conference in London would determine America's approach to renewable energy investment for the next decade. Anthony had spent 6 months crafting position papers that would be presented at the summit. His analysis of wind power efficiency had caught the attention of senior officials who decided their youngest analyst deserved to be there when history was made. But first, he had to get past Patricia Williams. Patricia stood behind the gate counter like a fortress wall, her blonde hair sprayed into immobility, her blue blazer bearing the golden wings of Northern Atlantic Airways. She had been a gate agent for 12 years, and 12 years had taught her to spot trouble before it boarded her aircraft. A young black man in an expensive suit carrying a first-class boarding pass registered as trouble. "Excuse me," Patricia called out as Anthony approached the boarding lane. "Can I see your ticket again?" Anthony handed over his boarding pass, his stomach tightening with familiar dread. He had seen this expression before. On the faces of professors who questioned his presence in graduate school, on the faces of colleagues who assumed he was an intern when he was actually their peer, on the faces of people who couldn't reconcile his appearance with his achievements. Patricia studied the boarding pass like it was written in hieroglyphics. She typed something into her computer, frowned, typed again. The printer beside her churned out a slip of paper that she examined with the intensity of a detective reviewing evidence. "There's something wrong with this ticket," she announced loudly enough for other passengers to hear. What kind of problem, Anthony asked, keeping his voice level despite the heat rising in his chest. "The credit card authorization looks suspicious. We've had a lot of fraud lately. People using stolen cards to buy expensive tickets they can't afford." The accusation hung in the air like tear gas. Around them, other passengers began to stare. Anthony felt the familiar weight of being the only black face in a sea of white travelers, all of whom were suddenly questioning whether he belonged. "I can show you my ID," Anthony offered. "You can verify the card." Patricia shook her head with the satisfied expression of someone who had found exactly what she was looking for. "The system is flagged. I'm going to need you to step aside while we sort this out." Step aside was code for stand over there while we humiliate you in front of everyone and then deny you service. Anthony had a choice. He could cause a scene demand to speak to supervisors, threaten lawsuits. But he was 26 years old. Black and alone in an airport filled with people who would automatically assume any confrontation was his fault. Making noise would only confirm their prejudices. So he stepped aside. For 3 hours, he watched other passengers board the flight he had paid to join. Patricia processed dozens of boarding passes without question, including several passengers who were clearly flying standby. But Anthony remained in airport purgatory, his boarding pass marked with whatever digital scarlet letter Patricia had attached to it. When the aircraft door finally closed and the plane pushed back from the gate, Anthony was still standing in the boarding area, his first-class ticket as worthless as Confederate currency. "We can get you on tomorrow's flight," Patricia offered with false sympathy. "Maybe coach just to be safe." Anthony spent that night sleeping on an airport bench because every hotel room in Chicago was booked for a medical conference. He missed the Energy Summit. His position papers were presented by a senior analyst who took credit for 6 months of Anthony's work. His career trajectory, carefully planned and meticulously executed, was derailed by one woman's prejudice and the system that protected it. But lying on that airport bench at 3 a.m., listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of cleaning crews, Anthony made a promise that would reshape the next 2 decades of his life. Never again. The PhD program in energy policy was brutal by design. Harvard wanted to separate the serious scholars from the ambitious pretenders, and the curriculum reflected that philosophy. Anthony threw himself into the work with the intensity of a man who had something to prove. His dissertation advisor, Professor Margaret Thornton, was a former Department of Energy official who had transitioned to academia after a distinguished career in government service. She recognized something in Anthony that went beyond academic brilliance, the quiet fury of someone who had been underestimated once too often. "Your analysis of renewable energy integration is fascinating," she told him during one of their weekly meetings. "But you're thinking too small. You're focused on policy implementation. What about policy creation? What about the infrastructure that makes policies possible?" Anthony looked up from his research notes, hundreds of pages analyzing wind power efficiency and solar panel cost curves. "What do you mean policy is just paper unless you have the power to implement it?" Professor Thornton explained. "And power in America comes from two sources: government positions and private investment. You're thinking about the first. You should be thinking about both." That conversation changed Anthony's trajectory. He began studying not just energy policy, but energy finance. Not just how to write better regulations, but how to fund the infrastructure that made those regulations meaningful. Anthony's entry into the Department of Energy was supposed to be temporary, a 2-year fellowship to gain government experience before moving to a private sector position that paid better and demanded less. Instead, he discovered that he was exceptionally good at the delicate art of translating political priorities into workable policies. His breakthrough came during the 2004 energy crisis, when gasoline prices spiked to unprecedented levels. While senior officials panicked and politicians demanded immediate solutions, Anthony quietly drafted a comprehensive energy security framework that balanced immediate price relief with long-term infrastructure investment. The framework became the foundation for America's renewable energy policy for the next decade. Anthony's name wasn't on the final document. Junior analysts don't get public credit, but everyone in the department knew who had written it. Senator Maria Martinez, chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, requested Anthony personally for her staff. It was an unusual move for a junior official, but Senator Martinez had built her career by identifying talent before it became obvious to everyone else. The financial crisis that destroyed millions of Americans' retirement savings created opportunities for those with cash and courage. Anthony had been saving aggressively for 8 years, living below his means while building a nest egg for future investments. While real estate markets collapsed and stock prices plummeted, Anthony was quietly learning from some of the smartest investors in America. His government connections provided insights into energy policy directions. His technical expertise helped him evaluate renewable energy companies before they became household names. His first major investment was $50,000 in a wind power company that everyone thought was too ambitious. The technology wasn't proven, the market wasn't ready, and conventional wisdom suggested that renewable energy would never compete with fossil fuels. Anthony understood something the conventional wisdom missed: government policy was about to make renewable energy inevitable. The question wasn't whether wind and solar would succeed, but which companies would dominate those markets. By 2010, his $50,000 investment was worth $800,000. Success in energy investment required more than technical knowledge. It required relationships. Anthony began cultivating connections throughout the energy sector, from researchers developing next-generation battery technology to executives planning infrastructure projects. He joined investment groups, attended industry conferences, and built a reputation as someone who understood both the technical and political aspects of energy development. His government salary provided credibility. His investment success provided capital. His analytical skills provided the insights that separated good opportunities from great ones. By 2015, Anthony's investment portfolio was worth $12 million. He had become one of the most successful energy investors in Washington, despite maintaining his day job at the Department of Energy. The opportunity to join Blackstone Energy Partners came at exactly the right moment. Anthony had spent 15 years building expertise, relationships, and capital. Blackstone offered him the chance to deploy all three on a scale that could reshape entire industries. As a partner in the firm, Anthony had access to investment opportunities worth hundreds of millions of dollars, infrastructure projects, technology companies, and occasionally troubled businesses that needed capital to survive. When Meridian Airways faced financial crisis in 2022, their stock price collapsed from $180 per share to $23 per share in 6 months. The airline was bleeding cash, losing customers, and facing bankruptcy unless they could find new investors. Anthony saw an opportunity that went beyond financial returns. The airline industry had been treating customers like cargo for decades, prioritizing operational efficiency over human dignity. Someone with sufficient ownership could change that culture. Blackstone Energy Partners purchased 34% of Meridian Airways for $8.7 billion, giving them effective control of the company. Anthony structured the deal through shell corporations and beneficial ownership arrangements that kept his name out of public filings. To Meridian Airways management, Blackstone was just another investment fund providing capital. They had no idea that their largest shareholder was a man who had been humiliated by their industry and had spent 20 years acquiring the power to ensure it never happened again. Sitting in seat 1A of the boarding area, waiting for a flight that would determine the future of global energy policy, Dr. Anthony Jackson reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 24 years since Patricia Williams had denied him a seat he had paid for. 24 years of building expertise, relationships, and capital. He owned the airline that was about to drag him off their aircraft. Carmen Rodriguez and Captain Morrison had no idea they were about to commit assault against their ultimate boss. The irony was almost poetic. Anthony checked his phone. Maria Gonzalez, his chief of staff at Blackstone, had confirmed that the Phoenix Protocol was ready for activation. One text message would trigger a series of corporate actions that would reshape Meridian Airways forever. He looked at his watch. The G7 summit began in 12 hours. The renewable energy framework he had spent 6 months crafting would determine how $500 billion in global investment was allocated over the next decade. But first, he had a more personal matter to resolve. The gate agent who thought she could humiliate him with impunity was about to learn the cost of prejudice. The captain who believed his authority was absolute was about to discover the limits of corporate power. The officers who were preparing to drag him off this aircraft were about to become participants in the most expensive discrimination incident in aviation history. Anthony Jackson had waited 24 years for this moment. He was ready. The moment Officer Rodriguez's hands made contact with Dr. Anthony Jackson's arm, the trajectory of Meridian Airways shifted toward corporate apocalypse. What happened in the next 4 minutes would cost $34 billion, destroy careers, trigger federal investigations, and create the most viral discrimination incident in aviation history. But first, it would hurt. "Sir, you need to stand up now." Officer Rodriguez said, his grip firm but not yet violent. Behind him, Officer Thompson positioned himself to grab Dr. Jackson's other arm. Officer Kowalski stood ready to provide whatever force the situation required. Dr. Jackson looked up at the 3 men surrounding his seat. His voice carried throughout the first-class cabin, clear and calm, designed to be picked up by the dozen phones recording every moment. "Officers, I want everyone to understand what's happening here. I am not resisting. I am not threatening anyone. I have committed no crime and violated no regulation. I am being physically removed because this airline sold more seats than they have available, and they decided I looked like their most convenient target." Captain Morrison's face flushed red with authority, challenged. "Remove him now." The first pull was gentle, almost polite. Officer Rodriguez tugged at Dr. Jackson's arm, with the kind of force used to guide elderly passengers or help children. Dr. Jackson remained seated, not actively resisting, but not volunteering to participate in his own humiliation. "I will not make this easy," he said quietly. "If you want to drag a paying customer off this aircraft, you'll have to drag me. In row 14C, Rachel Martinez's Instagram live stream had climbed to 2.3 million viewers. Her phone captured every moment as the situation escalated from customer service dispute to physical confrontation. Comments flooded her screen faster than she could read. "This is insane. Call the FBI. Someone help him. This is America in 2023. Sue them for everything." David Kim's Twitter thread was exploding across social media. His real-time documentation had been retweeted by journalists, celebrities, and civil rights activists who recognized the viral potential of discrimination caught on camera thread. Meridian Air physically removing black passenger Dr. Anthony Jackson from paid seat. No violations, no disturbance, just corporate racism in real time. This is unconscionable. 1 of 27. The second pull was harder. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Thompson coordinated their effort lifting Dr. Jackson from his seat with enough force to overcome passive resistance. His briefcase tumbled to the floor, spilling classified documents across the aircraft aisle. Careful with those papers, Dr. Jackson said, his voice still unnaturally calm. They contain classified information for the G7 Energy Summit. Damaging them could be considered an act against national security. Morrison scoffed. "Save the theatrics. Keep moving him." But something in Dr. Jackson's tone had penetrated Officer Murphy's consciousness. 15 years of law enforcement had taught him to recognize when situations were more complicated than they appeared. This passenger wasn't drunk or disorderly. He wasn't making threats or causing disturbances. He was speaking like someone who understood legal consequences better than the people removing him. As they maneuvered Dr. Jackson into the narrow aisle, his right shoulder struck the armrest of row 2 with a sound that made passengers gasp. The impact wasn't accidental. The confined space made it inevitable, but it was violent enough to tear his shirt and send pain shooting down his arm. "Stop!" Jessica Walsh called out from the galley. "He's injured." Dr. Jackson's face tightened with pain, but his voice remained steady. "Officers, you are injuring a passenger who has committed no crime. This assault is being recorded and broadcast live to millions of viewers." Flight attendant Miguel Santos stood frozen in the galley, his training manual offering no guidance for situations where management had created the crisis. Every instinct told him this was wrong, but challenging Captain Morrison's authority could end his career. The third officer, Kowalski, was growing impatient with the careful removal process. "Move him faster. We're holding up the whole aircraft." They began dragging Dr. Jackson down the aisle with increased urgency. His polished leather shoes scraped against the carpet as his body was pulled past rows of horrified passengers. Blood seeped through his white shirt where his shoulder had scraped against the seat frame. But Dr. Jackson maintained his dignity even as his body was being brutalized. He didn't fight back. He didn't curse or threaten. He simply let them reveal themselves for what they were, while the world watched. "This is being documented," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every phone recording the incident. "I am Dr. Anthony Jackson. I am being forcibly removed from Flight 638 for refusing to give up a seat I purchased lawfully. I have committed no violation of any law or regulation." In row 23C, Maria Santos, a high school teacher, was live streaming the incident to her Facebook followers. "This is happening right now on Meridian Airways," she narrated. "They're dragging this man off the plane for no reason except he's black, and they needed someone to blame for their overbooking." Her stream was being shared rapidly through parent groups, teacher networks, and community organizations. The hashtag Meridian Brutality began trending on Facebook alongside the Twitter explosion. James Peterson, a civil rights lawyer in row 19A, was documenting everything with the precision of someone who recognized actionable civil rights violations in progress. His legal analysis posted in real time to his Instagram account, followed by 89,000 attorneys, provided expert commentary on the federal laws being violated. This is textbook discrimination under 42 U.S.C. 1981, physical removal without cause, targeting based on race, corporate liability through respondeat superior. This airline is facing $50+ million in federal civil rights exposure, documenting everything. As they reached the aircraft door, Dr. Jackson's phone buzzed with incoming messages. Maria Gonzalez, watching the incident unfold through news feeds and social media, was coordinating the corporate response from Blackstone Energy Partners offices in downtown Manhattan. But Dr. Jackson couldn't reach his phone. His arms were restrained by officers who were focused on removing him as quickly as possible before the situation attracted more attention. They had no idea it was already too late for damage control. The jet bridge felt like a tunnel toward judgment. Each step carried them further from customer service toward federal civil rights violations. Each moment was being captured by cameras inside the aircraft, transmitted to millions of viewers who were watching corporate authority reveal its true nature. At the midpoint of the jet bridge, Dr. Jackson's shoulder, already damaged from the initial impact, was jarred again as Officer Rodriguez lost his grip. The pain was sharp enough to make him stumble, but he recovered quickly, maintaining his composure even as his body was failing. "Officers," he said, his voice carrying back toward the aircraft where passengers were still recording, "you should know that your actions tonight will be studied in law schools and business schools for decades. This is how discrimination dies, not in darkness, but in the bright light of public exposure." Carmen Rodriguez followed the procession down the jet bridge, her face flushed with the satisfaction of authority exercised. 8 years of being passed over for promotion, 8 years of dealing with passengers she considered entitled and demanding had led to this moment of absolute power. She had no idea she was about to become the most famous gate agent in aviation history for all the wrong reasons. Captain Morrison remained at the aircraft door, watching his problem being solved with the efficiency he demanded. 25 years of flying had convinced him that passengers were cargo with opinions, and the best way to handle difficult cargo was to remove it quickly and decisively. He had no idea he had just physically assaulted the majority owner of his airline. At the bottom of the jet bridge, the officers finally released Dr. Jackson's arms. He stood unsteadily for a moment, his shoulders screaming with pain, his white shirt torn and blood-stained, his dignity intact despite the brutalization he had endured. The gate area had filled with passengers and airport personnel drawn by the commotion. Cell phone cameras captured every moment as Dr. Jackson straightened his jacket and looked back up the jet bridge toward Captain Morrison. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but carried across the terminal with the authority of boardrooms and courtrooms. "Captain Morrison, you have just physically assaulted the majority shareholder of Meridian Airways." Morrison's laugh echoed down the jet bridge. "Right. And I'm the Pope." Dr. Jackson pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and found Maria Gonzalez. He hit the speaker button and held the phone up so his voice would carry clearly. "Maria, it's time." The response was immediate, professional, and devastating. "Dr. Jackson, Blackstone Energy Partners Emergency Board is assembled. We have CEO Richard Hawthorne on the conference line. Sir, we saw the live stream. Are you injured?" Morrison's laughter died in his throat. Around the gate area, passengers who had been filming the incident suddenly realized they were witnessing something larger than customer service failure. Dr. Jackson looked directly at Morrison, his voice carrying the weight of $34 billion in corporate consequences. "Captain Morrison, meet your new owner." The silence that followed was the sound of an industry about to be transformed by the most expensive discrimination incident in corporate history. In that silence, Dr. Anthony Jackson realized that the promise he had made to himself 24 years ago on an airport bench in Chicago had finally been kept. Never again. The conference call speaker crackled to life in the terminal gate area, carrying voices that would reshape Meridian Airways forever. Dr. Anthony Jackson held his phone steady despite the throbbing pain in his injured shoulder, ensuring every word would be heard by the hundreds of passengers and airport personnel who had gathered to witness the confrontation. "Dr. Jackson, This is Richard Hawthorne, CEO of Meridian Airways. We've been monitoring the social media feeds. Are you seriously injured? Captain Morrison's face had gone white. The confident smirk that had carried him through 25 years of bullying passengers was melting like ice in summer heat. Around him, the gate area buzzed with the kind of electric tension that comes when ordinary people realize they're witnessing history. Dr. Jackson's voice remained unnaturally calm, each word precisely chosen for maximum impact. Mr. Hawthorne, I have sustained injury to my right shoulder. More importantly, your employees have just committed assault against a paying customer in front of millions of witnesses, violating multiple federal civil rights statutes and destroying your company's reputation in real time. Carmen Rodriguez, standing behind Captain Morrison, felt her legs weaken. The authority she had wielded so confidently 10 minutes earlier was evaporating as the magnitude of her mistake became clear. She had targeted the one passenger she couldn't afford to touch. Officer Murphy, the security officer who had reluctantly participated in the removal, stepped forward with the expression of someone who had just realized he had been used as a weapon in someone else's war. Dr. Jackson, I need to apologize. We were told you were being disruptive. I can see now that was not accurate. Dr. Jackson nodded acknowledgement, but his attention remained focused on the phone call that was being broadcast to the world through dozens of live streams. A black SUV pulled up to the terminal curb with the kind of urgency reserved for medical emergencies and corporate crises. Maria Gonzalez stepped out carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents worth more than most people's houses. At 34, she was one of the most respected investment managers on Wall Street, and her arrival signaled that this situation was about to escalate beyond anything Meridian Airways had ever experienced. She approached Dr. Jackson with the efficient concern of someone accustomed to managing crises worth billions of dollars. Sir, medical personnel are en route. Legal team is standing by. PR firm is coordinating media response, and the board documentation is ready for immediate presentation. Dr. Jackson nodded, then addressed the conference call speaker, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm transferring this call to Ms. Gonzalez, who will explain the ownership structure that your employees were apparently unaware of when they decided to brutalize me. Maria Gonzalez took the phone, her voice carrying the crisp authority of boardrooms and federal courthouses. Mr. Hawthorne, this is Maria Gonzalez, Chief Operating Officer of Blackstone Energy Partners. I'm transmitting ownership documents to your office immediately. As of March 2022, Blackstone owns 34% of Meridian Airways common stock, making us your largest shareholder with effective control of company operations. The silence on the call was deafening. Through the speaker, the sounds of a corporate emergency meeting could be heard: papers, shuffling phones, buzzing voices, whispering in the background. Hawthorne's voice, when it returned, carried the weight of a man watching his career disintegrate in real time. Ms. Gonzalez, I need to verify this information with our corporate records. Verification is unnecessary, Maria replied. Dr. Jackson is the beneficial owner of Blackstone's Meridian Airways position. Your employees just physically assaulted your company's controlling shareholder on live television. Captain Morrison had gone from white to green. His hand trembled as he reached for his radio, but Maria's voice stopped him. Captain Morrison, please step away from any communication devices. You are now under investigation for assault, civil rights violations, and corporate misconduct. Anything you say will be documented and potentially used in federal proceedings. Carmen Rodriguez sank into a nearby chair, her hands shaking as the reality of her situation penetrated her consciousness. 8 years with Meridian. Airways, a career she had built despite being passed over for promotion repeatedly, was ending in the most public and humiliating way possible. The medical team arrived with the efficient precision of airport emergency response. Dr. Jackson submitted to examination while maintaining the conference call, turning his medical treatment into a public documentation of the injuries Meridian Airways had inflicted on their own majority owner. Dislocated shoulder, multiple contusions, torn clothing. The paramedic reported loud enough to be captured by the recording devices surrounding them. consistent with forcible removal and physical trauma. Meanwhile, social media was exploding with a velocity that social media analysts would study for years. Rachel Martinez's Instagram live stream had reached 4.7 million concurrent viewers. David Kim's Twitter thread was being retweeted every 3 seconds. Meridian brutality was trending #1 globally, surpassing sports events and political scandals. Celebrity reactions were flooding social media platforms. Just watched Meridian Air physically brutalize their own majority shareholder. This is America's racism problem in corporate form. Boycott immediately. Major recording artist with 47 million followers. As a frequent flyer, I will never use Meridian Air again. This is unconscionable corporate behavior that demands federal investigation. Hollywood actor with 23 million followers. The irony is staggering. They dragged off the man who owns their company. Karma doesn't get more perfect than this. Comedy show host with 15 million followers. The stock market, though officially closed, was reacting through after-hours trading with the violence of a financial earthquake. Meridian Airways stock price had plummeted from $312 per share to $178 per share in the 2 hours since the incident began. Every minute of continued coverage drove the price lower as institutional investors realized they were watching a company destroy itself in real time. Richard Hawthorne's voice returned to the conference call, now carrying the desperate tone of a man trying to save his career. Dr. Jackson, on behalf of Meridian Airways, I offer our most sincere apologies. We will conduct a thorough investigation and take appropriate action against any employee who participated in this incident. Dr. Jackson's response was measured, professional, and devastating. Mr. Hawthorne, apologies are insufficient. Your company has revealed institutional prejudice that goes far beyond individual employee misconduct. Captain Morrison's behavior suggests a pattern of discrimination that your management has either ignored or enabled. Maria Gonzalez opened her portfolio and removed a document that would reshape the airline industry. Mr. Hawthorne, we're invoking Section 15 of our investment agreement, which grants Blackstone immediate operational control in the event of reputational crisis or criminal conduct by management personnel. The language was corporate speak for hostile takeover. Dr. Jackson, through his investment vehicle, was about to assume direct control of Meridian Airways. Effective immediately, Maria continued. Dr. Jackson is assuming the position of chairman of the board. Captain Morrison and gate agent Rodriguez are terminated for cause. Officer contracts are under review, and we're implementing immediate policy changes to prevent discrimination incidents. Carmen Rodriguez let out a sound that was part gasp, part sob. Her career was over. Not just with Meridian Airways, but likely in the entire aviation industry. Her name and face would be associated with discrimination for the rest of her professional life. Captain Morrison tried one final act of defiance. You can't just fire me. I have union protection. I have 25 years with this company. Dr. Jackson looked at him with something approaching pity. Captain Morrison, your employment contract includes a conduct clause that explicitly prohibits discriminatory behavior and assault against passengers. Your union cannot protect you from criminal liability or civil rights violations. The FAA had arrived, announced by airport personnel who appeared at the gate with the grim efficiency of federal investigators. The Federal Aviation Administration took discrimination incidents seriously, particularly when they involved physical assault, and were broadcast live to millions of viewers. Dr. Jackson, the lead investigator. Assistant Administrator Sarah Chen approached with credentials and recording equipment. I'm Sarah Chen, FAA, Office of Civil Rights. We need to document this incident for federal investigation. Meridian Airways is facing immediate review of their operating certificate. The threat was clear. If the investigation revealed widespread discrimination, Meridian Airways could lose their federal license to operate commercial flights. Dr. Jackson nodded to Administrator Chen, then addressed the conference call one final time. "Mr. Hawthorne, you now understand the scope of this situation. Federal investigation, civil rights liability, criminal charges against your employees, stock price collapse, social media catastrophe, and effective immediately new management." Through the speaker, Hawthorne's voice carried the defeated tone of a man who had just watched his company's reputation die on live television. "Dr. Jackson, what do you need from us to begin damage control?" "Mr. Hawthorne, damage control is impossible. What we need now is transformation, complete organizational restructuring, zero-tolerance discrimination policy, victim compensation fund, and congressional testimony on discrimination in commercial aviation." The crowd around the gate had grown to several hundred people, passengers, airport employees, media personnel, and curious travelers who had heard about the incident through social media. Dr. Jackson stood at the center of it all, his torn shirt and injured arm serving as visual evidence of corporate brutality. But his voice, when he addressed the crowd, carried the quiet authority of someone who had just reshaped an industry. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight represents everything wrong with how corporations treat people they consider disposable, but it also represents the power of accountability when prejudice meets consequences." The applause began slowly, with individual passengers clapping, then building as hundreds of people realized they had witnessed justice delivered in real time. Dr. Anthony Jackson, standing in the terminal where he had been brutalized, had just become the most powerful man in commercial aviation. The airline that had dragged him off their aircraft now belonged to him. The emergency board meeting convened in a conference room that usually hosted discussions about fuel costs and route optimization. Today, it would witness the complete transformation of a corporate culture that had enabled discrimination for decades. Dr. Anthony Jackson arrived wearing a fresh suit, his right arm in a medical sling that served as a visible reminder of the previous night's brutality. The legal team had advised him to emphasize the injury for maximum impact during media coverage and potential litigation. Media vans lined the street outside Meridian Airways headquarters like siege equipment. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and international outlets had dispatched their top business correspondents to cover what financial analysts were calling the most expensive customer service failure in corporate history. Inside the conference room, 15 board members sat around a mahogany table that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. Richard Hawthorne, the CEO who had spent the night fielding calls from institutional investors and federal regulators, looked like he had aged a decade in 8 hours. The financial damage reports were stacked on the table like evidence in a corporate murder trial. Stock price down 73% from opening to current after-hours trading. Market capitalization, $34.2 billion lost in 18 hours. Booking cancellations, 127,000 passengers in 12 hours. Social media mentions 47 million posts with overwhelmingly negative sentiment. Competitor stock gains, $8.7 billion as passengers switched to other airlines. Federal investigations launched by FAA Department of Transportation, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Dr. Jackson entered the room with Maria Gonzalez and a legal team that specialized in corporate transformation. Their presence sent a clear message. This wasn't a consultation. This was a takeover. "Gentlemen, ladies." Dr. Jackson began, his voice carrying the calm authority that had made him one of the most effective energy negotiators in government service. "We're here to rebuild this company from the foundation up. Not because we want to, but because your previous management has made transformation the only alternative to bankruptcy." He gestured toward the financial reports. "These numbers represent more than monetary loss. They represent broken trust, institutional failure, and the cost of enabling prejudice in corporate decision-making." Board member Patricia Sullivan, a former airline executive with 30 years of industry experience, raised her hand hesitantly. "Dr. Jackson, with respect, don't you think immediate operational changes might be too disruptive? We have thousands of employees and millions of passengers depending on stability." Dr. Jackson's response was measured but firm. "Ms. Sullivan, What's disruptive is having your employees broadcast discrimination to 5 million people. What's disruptive is losing $34 billion in market value because you prioritized operational convenience over human dignity. He opened a leather portfolio and removed documents that had been prepared throughout the night by teams of attorneys and policy experts. Effective immediately, Meridian Airways will implement the following changes. First, zero-tolerance discrimination policy. Any employee found engaging in racial, ethnic, or economic profiling will face immediate termination and personal legal liability. Second, Customer Bill of Rights. No passenger will be involuntarily removed from an aircraft unless they pose a documented safety threat or violate federal law. Overbooking compensation will increase to $5,000 minimum to ensure voluntary compliance. Third, Independent Oversight Committee. Former federal judges and civil rights attorneys will monitor company operations and investigate passenger complaints with full authority to impose penalties. Fourth, employee profit sharing aligned with customer satisfaction metrics. If passengers trust us, employees prosper. If passengers flee, everyone shares the consequences. Fifth, Community Investment Program. $100 million annually for minority business development and civil rights organizations. The board members exchanged glances that ranged from resignation to relief. These changes would be expensive, but they offered a path toward rebuilding the corporate reputation that had been destroyed in one night. Maria Gonzalez distributed implementation timelines that showed the efficiency of an organization accustomed to managing billion-dollar transitions. Legal framework completion, 72 hours. Employee training programs launched within 1 week. Federal compliance audit initiated immediately. Congressional testimony scheduled for next month. Captain Blake Morrison sat in his Arlington apartment staring at legal documents that would reshape the rest of his life. The termination paperwork from Meridian Airways was the least of his problems. Federal prosecutors were reviewing video evidence for potential civil rights charges. The FAA was conducting an immediate review of his pilot's license. Personal injury attorneys were calculating damages from the assault he had ordered. His phone rang constantly with calls from reporters seeking comment, but his attorney had advised complete silence. Anything he said would be used against him in multiple legal proceedings that could result in criminal charges, civil liability, and the end of his aviation career. The Morrison family name, once respected in aviation circles, would now be associated with corporate discrimination and passenger brutality. Carmen Rodriguez had spent the night crying in her Queens apartment, watching her career implode on social media. Her name was trending on Twitter alongside videos of the incident. Thousands of people were calling for her prosecution. Employment attorneys were explaining that discrimination lawsuits could result in personal financial liability that would follow her for decades. Her phone had been buzzing with calls from reporters and interview requests from news programs, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Every news story included her photograph captured at the moment she had decided to target Dr. Jackson for removal. She was 34 years old, unemployed, and unemployable in any customer service industry. Her 8 years with Meridian Airways had ended with her becoming the face of corporate racism. Officer Murphy, the security officer who had reluctantly participated in the removal, was cooperating fully with federal investigators. His body camera footage and radio communications proved that he had expressed concern about the removal, but had been overridden by Morrison and Carmen. His cooperation deal with prosecutors included testifying about the institutional pressures that led airport security to prioritize airline requests over passenger rights. His testimony would help reform training protocols for airport security throughout the country. Jessica Walsh, the flight attendant who had tried to prevent the escalation, received a personal call from Dr. Jackson. Her efforts to protect a passenger from management misconduct had been noted and appreciated. Ms. Walsh, Dr. Jackson said during their conversation, "Your actions showed moral courage when your superiors showed moral failure. You'll be leading our new customer advocacy training program." Luis Vargas, the gate supervisor who had witnessed the discrimination, was promoted to vice president of customer experience reform. His 15 years of industry experience and his recognition of the incident's wrongness made him ideal for rebuilding customer relations. The Department of Transportation launched an immediate investigation into discrimination practices throughout the commercial aviation industry. Dr. Jackson's incident had exposed patterns of abuse that extended far beyond Meridian Airways. Secretary of Transportation Amanda Foster announced during a televised press conference, "The physical removal of Dr. Jackson represents broader failures in how airlines treat passengers. We're implementing industry-wide reforms to ensure customer service never again becomes customer brutalization." Congressional hearings were scheduled within 30 days with Dr. Jackson as the key witness. His testimony would lead to the Airline Passenger Protection Act, mandating federal oversight of airline customer service practices and creating criminal penalties for discriminatory passenger removal. The FAA began reviewing Meridian Airways' operating certificate, a process that could result in flight restrictions or complete grounding of the airline if institutional discrimination was proven. Competing airlines watching Meridian Airways' stock price collapse in real time began implementing preemptive policy changes to avoid similar incidents. Delta, American, United, and Southwest announced enhanced customer service training and revised overbooking procedures within 48 hours. Insurance companies raised premiums for discrimination coverage, forcing airlines to consider the financial cost of prejudiced employees. Risk management consultants began offering specialized training programs to prevent viral discrimination incidents. The International Association of Flight Attendants condemned Morrison's actions and announced enhanced training programs focused on passenger advocacy versus management pressure. Rachel Martinez, the travel blogger whose live stream had captured the incident, saw her follower count increase from 500,000 to 3.2 million in 24 hours. Her documentation of the incident led to interviews with major news networks and a book deal to write about social media activism. David Kim's Twitter thread became one of the most retweeted civil rights documentations in social media history. His real-time legal analysis helped educate millions of people about federal discrimination laws and corporate liability. The incident became a case study in business schools, law schools, and social media marketing programs. The Meridian Airways crisis was studied as an example of how corporate discrimination could destroy billions in market value in hours. 6 weeks after the incident, Dr. Jackson booked Flight 638 to London. Same route, same departure time, same seat 1A. The symbolism was intentional and powerful. The crew was entirely new. Captain Maria Santos, the first Latina captain in Meridian Airways history, personally welcomed Dr. Jackson aboard. The gate agent trained under the new customer advocacy protocols treated every passenger with the respect that had been missing for decades. As the plane lifted off from JFK, Dr. Jackson looked out the window at the airport where his life had been threatened and his dignity attacked. The transformation wasn't complete. Institutional change takes years, but the foundation had been laid. His phone buzzed with a text from the Secretary of Energy G7 Summit. Successful. Renewable Energy Framework approved. $500 billion in global investment secured. Your sacrifice created more than airline reform, it secured America's energy future. Dr. Jackson smiled for the first time since the incident. Sometimes justice required personal cost, but the impact extended far beyond individual vindication. Meridian Airways' stock price began recovering slowly as investors recognized that new management and federal oversight had created unprecedented accountability. The company that had nearly been destroyed by discrimination was being rebuilt on principles of dignity and respect. Customer satisfaction scores, historically poor for Meridian Airways, began improving as employees understood that their jobs depended on treating passengers as human beings rather than cargo. The profit-sharing program aligned everyone's interests with customer experience. Within 6 months, Meridian Airways had become the industry leader in customer satisfaction, not because they wanted to, but because Dr. Jackson's ownership had made discrimination economically impossible. The airline that had dragged him off their aircraft had been transformed into a company that prioritized human dignity over operational convenience. Dr. Anthony Jackson had kept the promise he made to himself 24 years earlier on an airport bench in Chicago. Never again. Dr. Anthony Jackson sat at his desk reviewing the quarterly report from Meridian Airways. Customer satisfaction had increased 340%. Employee retention was at industry highs. Stock price had not only recovered but exceeded pre-incident levels as investors recognized that integrity could be profitable. His shoulder had healed, though he still felt occasional stiffness when the weather changed. The physical reminder served a purpose, ensuring he never forgot the cost of challenging prejudice or the power of accountability. A letter from Jessica Walsh lay open on his desk. Dr. Jackson, I wanted you to know that our new training program has prevented 17 potential discrimination incidents in the past month. Employees now understand that their job is protecting passengers, not enabling management prejudice. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like when dignity is under attack. The scholarship fund established in his name had awarded grants to 127 students pursuing careers in energy policy and civil rights law. Young people who faced barriers similar to those he had encountered decades earlier now had resources to overcome them. His grandson, Marcus, named in his honor, was too young to understand what had happened that night at JFK. But someday, when Marcus was old enough to face prejudice himself, he would know that his grandfather had proven that dignity was not negotiable and justice was not impossible. Dr. Anthony Jackson didn't set out to change an industry that night at JFK. He simply wanted to fly to London for an energy summit that would secure America's renewable future. But sometimes justice arrives not with fanfare, but with the quiet dignity of a person who refuses to accept that their worth is determined by others' prejudice. 6 months later, Meridian Airways became the industry leader in customer satisfaction. Not because they had to, but because they finally understood that every passenger carries dreams, dignity, and stories worth respecting. The viral video that nearly destroyed them became their blueprint for transformation. Today, when Dr. Jackson travels, flight crews know his story. Not because he demands recognition, but because his quiet strength in that moment taught an entire industry that power isn't about who you can push around, it's about who you choose to lift up. Every time a passenger is treated with dignity instead of suspicion, every time respect wins over prejudice, the echo of that moment in Seat 1A continues to change hearts at 30,000 feet. The promise he made on an airport bench 24 years ago never again had become a reality, not just for him, but for millions of travelers who would never know his name, but would benefit from his refusal to accept that discrimination was the price of convenience. Never again. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea they were making the biggest mistake of their career? This story proves that dignity and justice don't always make noise. They make change. If Dr. Jackson's quiet strength inspired you, smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs to see what happens when courage meets consequence. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because stories like this remind us that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is simply refusing to accept it. Drop a comment and tell us about a time you stood up for what was right even when the world said to sit down. See you in the next video.